Hi, and thanks so much for joining us on the Sierra Bible Church Sermon of the Week. We hope you enjoy this message by Pastor Nate Levering.
Thanks, Em. When my wife, we were sitting next to each other, and first she saw that big screen about your marriage matters, she leaned over and she said, "We need to work on that." And I was like, shoot, what did I do wrong this time? And then she's like, no, because we're going to share. And I said, don't worry about it. We're talking about conflict. We got it wired. We'll be fine on that. So we're looking forward to it. We do have, I feel, some great help and a lot of fun that evening. Will be a fun time together. My name's Nate. Nothing, Norm. All right, never mind. We'll keep moving. I was hoping I would yell for Emily, too, over myself, Norm, so you get it honestly. We're in the middle of a series we're calling Unbound, and it's going to culminate in Easter, and it's going to be, I think, this incredible celebration of what God does for us, not only in the cross, but also the resurrection. There's this crazy narrative that we're going to look at on Easter morning around a guy by the name of Lazarus, and it's this phenomenal story. And you may have friends in our community that aren't connected to a local church. Maybe they have questions about what it is that their weird friends you do on Sunday mornings. And maybe you just want to invite them on Easter as we talk about what it looks like to live in the freedom of what Jesus' resurrection proclaims for us. We're excited about that. As we've built toward that, we're talking about these areas where Jesus wants to sort of take our lives and maybe even some of those places where by way of our culture or by way of just sort of our heart, we get kind of chained up in a lot of areas. And what does it look like for Jesus to free us to live the life that he's designed for us? And so this morning, we're going to talk about one of my favorites. And I only say that because it's sort of one of the big sort of struggles in my own life. And it's this idea that how does Jesus, in a relationship with him, free us from a life of hurry and distraction and actually settle when we come to him, our hearts and our lives from the inside out. One of my favorite books on the topic was written by a guy by the name of John Ortberg, and it's titled The Life You've Always Wanted. Maybe you've read this, and he has a chapter in there where he talks about a dog named Tattoo, and it comes from a chapter that he wrote on hurry and how do we eliminate this in our lives. So he tells a story about a dog named Tattoo. This was many years ago. He was reading the newspaper just outside of Tacoma, and there was a story about a basset hound. So if you've ever seen a basset hound, we know basset hounds. My uncle was a fire chief in Long Beach, and he just loved basset hounds. That was like his dog. If you've never seen one before, you don't have a picture for it. They're like a full-size dog, like a hound, that's like legs just never grew, right? So if you see one, they don't really run unless, it's time to eat. But they're just like, there's not a lot there. And this particular story was told this way in the newspaper, and it went like this. The Tattoo was not prepared for an evening walk, let alone a run, until his owner had, unbeknownst to the owner, shut the door with the leash caught in it. And so the owner begins to take off through the neighborhood on his drive, and poor little Tattoo is trying to catch up. And what was seen from the police cop on his motorcycle as he came up behind this car was Tattoo at full speed, and then he would fall and roll and slide and fall and roll. He'd get up and run and fall and roll. He's just like, I can do it. It's going to stop eventually. And maybe. And eventually the cop pulled over the car and said, hey, your dog is stuck to, and Tattoo was okay. And what John says, and it's a mirror for me personally, and I think maybe for many of us, that we live in a culture and we have these kind of untrained, oftentimes, hearts that can look a little bit like Tattoo trying to catch up, hoping that one day it's gonna stop. We begin to maybe open the scriptures, and even that little promise that Jesus said, come to me and I will give you rest. That's the New Testament word for a gift that God gave his people in the generation account. He actually wove it into humanity. And maybe you've heard this word. It's called Sabbath. to stop and remind yourself that you are not what you do. You are not the lies that the devil tells you about yourself. Stop and look up. Stop and remember that God has, because of what he did on the cross and the resurrection, actually freed us. We are free people. We can. So we are not slaves. Slaves work 7 days a week. You are not one. In Christ, stop. Sabbath. Come to me. Rest. I will give you rest for your soul. And so I think for me, then it kind of becomes that kind of a picture. Now, sometimes we hear Sabbath and we think, okay, this is a law, and how do we have to do this, and what is this? And certainly we'll look at a little bit of that this morning. But my two little fish are going to help us with how do we understand, after Jesus rose from the grave, these laws and sort of God's expectation, and how do we take the good of what God has given us by way of his gifts and put them into practice in our lives? How are we to see these things? And actually, these two fish, not these two, because I just bought them last night, because I assume they're going to die fairly soon if somebody wants them after the service, because they can keep them alive. They're all yours. I will kill them in a matter of time. Sorry, we have fish number 1 and fish number 2. Here's what they're here to teach us for. I would have named them, but like I said, they won't be around for all that long. Sad, I know. Number 1, she's the female over here. She's always number 1. Come on. So imagine for a second living inside a fishbowl. Imagine for a second being one of these fish, right? And thinking about this term that has been extremely helpful for me in understanding what it looks like to live in and sort of under God's authority with regards to the law that he gives us. And it's some language that is helpful, I think, and it's called liberating restriction. So for a second, I want our little fish to help us think about, and say it with me, our liberating restrictions. We're going to try it one more time. Okay, so restrictions that free us, right? And we all understand these things, because if anybody's gotten up to play an instrument or they've gone out to play a sport and you went to watch them, you can tell if they practiced, right? You with me? And the only way that they can actually perform that with any sense of freedom and beauty and creativity is what? They restricted themselves so that then they could live in a particular way. Imagine these little fish looking out, and they're just looking out of the fishbowl through this glass prison. And they see all of you living life, having fun, doing what you want. They start talking amongst themselves, and they say, hey, I got a plan. I'm getting out of here. What I really want is a little bit of freedom, like no constraint kind of life. Man, I want it. I want to just wait. When I jump out of this fishbowl, you're going to see what fish were made to do. And I'm going to live my best life. Right? And so he swims and swims and swims, because she's going to stay in there going, you're an idiot. And he jumps out onto the ground. I did this illustration once at Somerville High, and I actually grabbed the fish and put them on the ground. I told my wife I would not do that. But imagine if I took the fish, right? And I had the little fish, which I don't, Tana, in this, and I dumped it out onto the ground. What would begin to happen to our free fish? He would begin from the inside out to die. Why? Because his life is actually, funny thing about fish, because of the gills that God gave them, they actually live best inside water. Inside these constraints is actually where they're free to live. Not in a world without them, but by choosing the ones that fit their nature. Are you with me? And it's how we orient ourselves to God's law. They're to give us freedom, to give us life, and we ought to see them that way. Tim Keller says it this way. He says, freedom then is not the absence of limitations and constraints, but, and here's the challenge, but we have an answer. But freedom is finding the right ones, those that fit our nature and liberate us. So what are those? I'm going to invite us to think for a few minutes this morning about rest, about stopping, about asking ourselves, what does it look like to be a Jesus follower that observes a kind of Sabbath rhythm in their lives. In so many ways, it's stopping the car, taking the leash out, and experience the freedom that God invited us to live with. As we've talked a little bit about, Sabbath was woven into the story from the very beginning. It's a part of the human story, and we'll look at how and why. The Sabbath day is actually a day that was given to God's people to be set apart, to be holy, to be like, hey, we start now and we stop now. And it isn't that one day is sort of the only day that God exists, but we're going to do something particular, something specific in that day. It's a day not only to stop and remember that our work doesn't make us who we are. It's a day not only to stop and remember that, but also, as we've said, to put a stake in the ground and remind ourselves because of what Jesus has done, we have been set free. We can stop. It's an act of resistance against the voices in our world. Now, when Jesus came upon the scene, this whole Sabbath idea had gotten flipped upside down. Because as we'll see, it became a law because they weren't very good at it. And so they had to sort of, be tied to this, and then it got all kinds of strange. So if you sort of look through the Old Testament regarding this idea of Sabbath or rest or stopping and looking up and remembering that God is sovereign, He's in control, that He is the provider. If you look at the sort of context around it, the Jewish nation actually came up with 39 categories of how to not work. Some of you know these things, and I think they're interesting. And there's hundreds of these different things, right? One thing you couldn't do on a Sabbath, you couldn't tear toilet paper. Like, that's work. You couldn't wear jewelry because that's doing work. That's carrying a burden. You couldn't turn the lights on and off. You couldn't start or stop your fire. If it was started, you had to let it. All of these were ways that we flipped the Sabbath rest upside down and made a lot of work out of what God was trying to give us to stop working. Jesus comes in then sometimes, and if you're reading through the Gospels, you're like, man, this is like a little violent Jesus. Like, man, and to me, it almost feels sometimes like, and this is a weird analogy, but I'm going to say it first, and then I get permission to say it. It's like Jesus is kind of this bowling ball that's rolling into this way of understanding the law, like a bunch of pins. And at times, the bowling ball just hits those pins and splinters them. And it's like, you guys got this wrong. It's time to flip it upside down. And what we'll see in Jesus is He is not only the conclusion in many ways, the summary of the Sabbath. He is our rest, as He promises. But He then teaches us how to walk within it, to let a Sabbath rest become a part of the rhythms of the way we live our lives, reminding us to put it into our physical calendar. He doesn't say get rid of it completely, because our hearts, my heart, your heart needs it. You were created for it. You are not a spiritual insomniac. You were not meant to be tied to some car that's going to stop maybe someday. You were meant with the freedom to stop now. And to hear God remind us of who and whose you are. So we're going to look at one of those places where Jesus comes into the context of this 39 categories, right, wrong. The Sabbath is no longer a release from work. It's actually, by the Pharisees and the Jews of the day, a sort of way by which we would judge ourselves. And Jesus is going to flip that upside down. If you have your Bibles, I'd invite you to open to Mark chapter 2. There's a number of these sections we could look at around the Sabbath. This is one that has some language, I think, that's super, super helpful for me personally, and I think for us as a whole. Mark chapter 2, if we look down in verse 23, it starts with these words, one Sabbath. Again, the word Sabbath means to stop. It means rest. When Jesus says, come to me, and I will give you, this is the same, it's rest, it's stop. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and His disciples, they're walking along. They began to pick up some heads of grain. So they just picked some grain from the surrounding field that they're walking through. The Pharisees, seeing them picking grain, which was something you were not allowed to do on the Sabbath, say these words, "Look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" And so they're going to call out Jesus and his disciples. Jesus answered in being called out, "Have you never read," now this is going to take us a little bit of context, but we can get there. "Have you never read what David," this is King David from the Old Testament, he's on the run from King Saul, "what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar, the high priest, David entered the house of God. And in the house of God, there's holy, set-apart bread for worship as a part of a ceremony, which is lawful," he goes on, "only for the priest to eat." David, not a priest, he runs in, he grabs this bread. "And he also gave it to some of his companions." This is called the showbread. It was set apart. And what Jesus is inviting them to consider is this. He's saying, remember that as we view the laws of the Old Testament, the rules, if you ever ask, man, some of us are reading through the Old Testament and people come and look at me and they're like, this isn't quite what I thought. There's a lot of rules. And it's like we got through all the rules and then we just start repeating the rules. And if you sort of break those down, you can break them down into three big categories. One is the sort of civil rules, how they were to order themselves as a nation. And then there's these ceremonial or worship rules, things like Jesus is tying the Sabbath to this rule of showbread and it's only meant for the priest, it's only meant for the temple. And then there's these moral rules. And now Jesus invites the Pharisees to see the Sabbath ordinance or rule, 39 categories, hundreds of ways we have to do that. You can't even tear toilet paper, as a ceremonial or worship rule. Jesus never does this kind of thing with a moral rule, with the moral law. He never says, hey, I know there's sometimes you're really struggling, so adultery is okay. He doesn't do that. He doesn't say sometimes it's okay to kill. Sometimes it's fine to steal. Lying's okay in certain situations. He doesn't do that because those are the moral laws. And they're right, and they're right, and they're right. Always good. Back to the fish analogy. So Jesus ties these things together. So he says, hey, we can think about the Sabbath like we saw David run in and take the bread. Now he's going to give some language to that, and we'll pick that up here. Because these ceremonial and worshipful laws were ultimately meant to point to Jesus. Verse 27. We'll finish this short section. Verse 27. Then Jesus says to them, the Sabbath, the day of rest, the day set aside, made holy by God for rest, was made for man. The Sabbath was made for man. The Sabbath was made for who? Man. For woman. For Nate. This is a gift given by God. Because I need it. And because without it, because I need it, my hope is that those words, that the Sabbath was made for me, will be what we carry this morning. And then he goes on, and I think words for the Pharisees. He says, isn't that man was made for the Sabbath? You've got this upside down. And then lastly, he says this, that the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. All of those things, from the consecrated bread to the day set apart for rest, all of those will find their full fulfillment when God eventually sends his Lord, the Messiah, his final king, and his name is Jesus. That's the one on the test, okay? So some of the other stuff you can slide on. Don't get that one wrong. All of this is pointing to find its fulfillment in Jesus. And so he reorders the way we understand the Sabbath and rest. But why do I need it so much? I forgot my list of books. They're sitting over there. They can stay over there. I got about 10 different books. Some people came to me and they're like, hey, have you ever read this book on the... Yeah, I read that one. Have you ever read... Yeah, oh, I got that one too. I am hungry for books about how do I do this? How do I live a life with a heart and a soul that finds its rest in Jesus? I'm going to show you 4 pictures. Here, if you don't believe me, here's 4 pictures. The first one is this. I don't know if ever you feel like this, but in a lot of ways, this is what the inside of my life feels like. And I'll give you a lot of confidence if I'm your pastor, but sometimes it just feels like I'm drowning. Anybody else with me? It's like there's more to do today than we have time. There's more concerns. There's more things we could pray about. There's more things we could fix. There's more da-da-da-da-da. And I don't know about you, but like the grass is going to start growing, and then I got to, and then I have to, and then I... And sometimes I think, in fact, most days, people ask me, how are you doing? I'm fine. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking this. If I could just get a 25-hour day, like one more hour, I could get done everything I need to get done. The problem with that is God says I don't need another hour to get done what I need to get done. I need a Sabbath. I need to figure out how to stop. Not how to work harder, but to rest better. That's the key. Because if I got 25 hours, guess what I'd be standing up here telling you I want? 26, come on. Like one more, let's get some stuff done. Right? And we sometimes feel like this. Next picture. Oh yeah, come on. There was some collective like, oh, that's a cute hamster. I don't know about you, but it's the picture of the dog on the leash. It's the place I need to be freed from. It's what Sabbath helps us stop. Say, I'm not all of these other things. I am a child of the living God. You know the only thing worse than the hamster ever getting what he thinks he really wants out of life and needs out of life? It's getting it and realizing it wasn't Jesus. That'll tear your soul out from the inside. So for many of us, we just stay on this thing. Well, man, if I stop, it's going to get really quiet. And we're not sure. Maybe God will judge us. Maybe he will come down us. Maybe he will remind us what we know is true of ourselves, that we're just not enough, or we just haven't produced enough. And so we run and we run and we run, and then we run into the Sabbath. And how many of you have had your body give out on you, and you knew that it was God saying, guess what? It's time to stop. It put you in this physical body, and that needs to remind you of a spiritual soul. Take care of it. If you abuse it, it will fall apart. Next picture. I don't actually do that, okay, very often. But it's a picture of this idea that I think I carry, that I have deep in my soul that my life is supposed to matter, that I have a purpose, that there's a reason I'm here. And sometimes I find myself waking up from a whole different distraction in life. And sometimes it's the phone or it's whatever shiny thing I find. And what the Sabbath was meant to do is to just create a stop in our lives, to turn it off. So again, we can hear from the God that created us. And then last picture, and how sad if that's us, right? That God's brought us into his good world. God desires us to see him, to pay attention, to step into beauty and creativity and a role. And instead we're like checking our NCAA bracket. Nothing wrong with those, okay? But in fact, that could be part of your Sabbath. We'll get to that later. But the problem is, if all we're doing is running, we're missing so much of what God has for us. I love the way C.S. Lewis talks about this. He says this, and it's kind of harsh words, but for me and for many, I think in our culture, we need it. He says that it would seem that our Lord finds our desires, the stuff we chase, the stuff we listen to, not too strong, but too weak. We, C.S. Lewis says, are half-hearted creatures, fooling around with drink and sex and ambition. When infinite joy, look up, is offered us like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in a slum because he cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday at sea, we, C.S. Lewis will go on to say, are far too easily pleased. And so how do we get our eyes up? How do we remember? How do we hear? Jesus says, come to me. Come to me. I will give you rest. Three things I think that we see throughout the scriptures, and we'll talk about a little bit of what Sabbath is. But the first one, and there's some fill-ins if you're doing this on your outline, but Sabbath is a rhythm of rest. It's just part of the human story. It's something God has put in us. The second is it's an act of resistance. And then lastly, it is the practice of liberation that God has given us to regularly say, I am a free person because of what Jesus has done. And it's that reminder that fuels us to see and to hear from him. You ever ask yourself this question? What is my body trying to tell me when it gets sleepy? Oh, come on. Somebody's got to be thinking Starbucks. Mike's thinking Red Bull. I know that if he's not asleep right. Right? I mean, there was this whole season in my life where this was years ago, and this is a little bit edgy right now, so if you need to tune out, distract, but where I was helping a number of men that were struggling with the addiction to methamphetamines. And I've never struggled with that because I've never tried the stuff and run crazy enough as it is. And one of these guys, I said, so what's the draw? We were actually sending him off to a great recovery program. He's doing amazing now. I said, what's the draw? And he said, Nate, when I'm high, I can live 6, 7, 8 days in a row and never sleep. He's like, I get so much done, I start doing the stuff I'm supposed to do twice. And now, I wasn't tempted to try it. But if I'm honest, there's a part in me that says more than rest, I'd rather have this magical gift to get everything done. I need to confess. I need to hear. Because God didn't make us around meth. He made us to be people that rest. And this is the rhythm. And it's a challenge, I think, in our world, especially for people like me. You know, one of the beautiful things that God did, even in the ordering of the days of creation, is that as he created, and maybe you remember the story, day 1, day 2, day 3, after these days, which all started in the evening as a part of rest, as he's setting up this rhythm for us to live in, he would create, and then he would say, do you remember what he'd say? He'd say, it's good. Was it finished? No, not yet. It was undone. It was unfinished. And what did God say about it? It's good. This is a gift that God's given us, to rest in the middle of lists that are not done, people that are not done, kids that are not done, jobs that are not done. It is good. What we see then, looking a little bit forward in Genesis chapter 2, the very next chapter, is this. God gives us some direction around this. He says, by the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So he has created this incredible good world that we live in. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. That's a fascinating phrase if you've ever thought about it. You ever ask yourself, why in the world did God rest? Like, is he tired? It's like, whew, all right, 6 days, that was all I could pump out. I better take a day of rest. Obviously not. Right? You with me? Why did he do it? Because you and I need it. Because if we go 7 to 7 to 7 to 7 to 7, we will hit a wall. And we will rest. And so what God builds in is this rhythm where we stop ourselves, we put rest on the calendar because our spiritual souls need it. So what a beautiful thing that God rests and he gives us this gift. God blessed the seventh day. He made it holy. It's a time period or a day set aside to him. He rested from all the work of creation that he had done, as we are to as well. I want you to hear in a fairly long little quote, a gal by the name of Ruth Haley Barton. If you're not familiar with her, I encourage you to just read her stuff. She's amazing, especially in this area of rest and soul work. But here's what she has to say about her practice of Sabbath. She says this, she says, I've experienced the utter joy and relief when Sabbath does happen. When the house has been cleaned, special food has been bought, the computer has been turned off, the last obligation has been completed or set aside. The candles or the fireplace has been lit, and it's time to stop. whether everything has been finished or not. I know what it is like to rest for hours until I have the energy to delight in something. Good food, a good book, a leisurely walk, a long-awaited conversation with someone I love. I know what it is like to feel joy and hope and peace flow back into my body and soul. Though I had thought it might never happen again, I know what it's like to see my home and my children through the Sabbath eyes of enjoyment. I know what it's like to have rest turn into delight, and delight turn into gratitude, and gratitude into worship. I know what it's like to recover myself so completely that I am able, by God's grace, to enter into my work on Monday with a renewed sense of God's calling and God's presence. God wove this into the way we work as people. Remember, long before it actually made it into the top 10 that we are to keep the Sabbath holy, these 10 commandments, it was part of the rhythm that God was teaching them to live with in their lives. And you might remember how God did this. He pulls the nation of Israel out of slavery, and then he's setting them up and kind of orchestrating not only their worship, but also their calendar. And he does this by the way he provides for them. And so what God does then, and we see this in Exodus chapter 16, is he says to them, okay, I'm going to provide for you. You're not going to have to go out. I mean, you're in the desert. And so each day I'm going to give you manna and I'm going to give you quail, just what you need. So the instruction was this: go out, get what you need, not more, and enjoy it in that day as my provision for you. But on the sixth day, God was going to do something unique. And so what God does is he says, okay, on the sixth day, I'm going to provide 2 times as much as you need. And actually on the next day, it won't spoil. And so what he does then is this. He says, 6 days you're to gather. On the 7th day, the Sabbath, this is the day set apart, there will not be any. So make sure on that 6th day you grab twice as much. Why? Because you need a day of rest. You are made this way. You'll know me when this is your pattern. You'll experience the rest that I have for you. But these guys are a little bit like us. So what we see in Exodus 16 is what? Nevertheless, some of these guys, not trusting God's goodness, went out on the 7th day and looked for more. And there was none there. There was none there. God was saying, I will be enough. I am enough. Will you trust me? The Sabbath was a way to rest from the work we had been done, to be reminded by the God who knows and loves and has named us that we are not what we do, whether it be mom, husband, parent, pastor. You are mine. Will you rest in that? The second thing that we see is that this Sabbath is an act of resistance. It's an act of saying, I am not those things. I am not the things the devil has to say about me. I'm not the things culture has to say about me. I'm not the things my own flesh has to say about me. I am a child of the living God. And I need a season, a stop, where I hear that, where I'm reminded of that, where I'm restored in that truth. I need an act of resistance to quiet those things. I'm going to kind of keep moving. And then lastly, we see this as a practice of liberation. We've talked about this a little bit, of just putting a stake in the ground and saying, I'm free because of what Jesus has done. God, restore me in the freedom that you won for me. It is finished. And as we talked about a little bit, there are these holy acts of worship in the Old Testament that were all meant to point to one day when God would fully and finally come in and become the rest that he had promised. When he would fully and finally be the living bread whereby we could be nourished and live the lives he's invited us to live. And so what Jesus says is that I am the Lord of the Sabbath. I am the one that these ceremonies and practices point to. It's me. See me. I am the Lord of the Sabbath. In what I did invites you to know you don't have to work. It comes by way of grace. It's been done for you. What you get to do is celebrate in it. And that's what Sabbath was. It wasn't this like where we stop back, we do nothing. Man, they entered in as recipients of God's grace in community to worship and celebrate and just love and be loved. And Jesus invites us to consider what it looks like to put Sabbath rest into our calendars because our hearts need it. The last couple little fill-ins there, and then we'll get really, really practical for a second, are these. That Jesus is our future rest. He is the Lord of the Sabbath. That we are to experience now, not by observing the law, but in relationship to Him. Let's hear one more time, Matthew chapter 11, when Jesus invites us, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you what? I'll give you rest. Now, some of you have had kind of trauma training in different ways. One of the things you get when you adopt kids like we have is a little bit of trauma training. And one of the things that I remember learning on the front end is that there may be times when your child who's new in your home and they're experiencing all kinds of craziness will just kind of start to shake. And they might shake their hands. They said, look for these kinds of things. And this is a message that it's time to go up to your child and just to put your arms around them and hug them. Not squeeze them, but hug them firmly. And what then begins to happen is that you can begin to slow their heart rate. They begin to, the word rest, they begin to settle. And Jesus' invitation for us is just that. That our hearts, that our souls are in need of His arms around us, allowing us to settle. He says, come to me, I'll give you rest. He says, take my yoke upon you. Learn from me, for I am gentle, I'm humble in heart. And you will find what? Rest for your souls. You will find the Sabbath rest you were created for, the Sabbath rest you desperately need, the Sabbath rest that will fill you and fuel you with the love that I have for you. And so what we see is that Jesus frees us from this kind of world of exhaustion, of chasing around the things that we think we need, the things we think we want, and the restlessness that comes so often, and gives us rest. He is our Sabbath. So now how do we maybe practice some of these things? So if you look on the right side of your bulletin, I think if you're anything like me, we need this. We see that God's given us this, but there's certainly not this law that you can't tear. That's been a hard word for me today. Tear toilet paper on the Sabbath. Like that's just crazy. So what is it that God's inviting us into? How do we create healthy rhythms as individuals, as families, maybe even as a church to rest the way that God has invited us to rest? And there's 4 categories that the Bible will kind of use to talk about honoring, keeping holy the Sabbath. The first one, this is just in the word, we talked about it already, is you have to stop. The second one is this idea of rest. What does rest look like? And it looks differently for you than it does for me. The third is delight. To stand in joy, to delight in something. And the last one is to worship. These are 4 parts, if you will, not in chronological order or anything, but these are 4 things to think about as we're reminded that God gave us a gift called the Sabbath. And now how do we practice that? How do we stop and rest and delight and worship? And so I just kind of put a few things on there that have been helpful to others that might be helpful to us. One of the most helpful things you can do is pick a time. And for some of us, we want that rhythm and we have the rhythm. So we're going to pick a 24-hour period. And maybe it's a sundown to sundown kind of thing. And, there's The Common Rule, which is a great book, and it talks a lot about these spiritual disciplines or liberating restrictions. And what he does, he's a lawyer, and he's got this crazy life. And so for them, it's Saturday night to Sunday night. But Sunday night, he spends 2 hours doing his emails because Monday would be a complete destruction of all things restful if he didn't get 2 hours. Do you hear what I'm saying? So we kind of figure it out for the lives that we have. But we pick a time. We have to stop. It finds its way onto our calendar. Maybe it's a few hours. Maybe it's just taking the things we already do and we stop beforehand. And we do them different. We do them as practices of Sabbath rather than getting another thing checked off the list. We got to be prepared and to plan. You heard this a little bit in Ruth's thing, and I know there's some of you even here that you prepare your food the night before because preparing food is just like, I do that all week. This is the time to stop from that, and we want to feast in it. So it means that we're going to have to be prepared. Maybe we're going to, if you have the ability to do it, we're going to go out to eat because mom's cooking and mom's doing it, so we just want to rest. So we pick a time. We find a way to be prepared, to have a plan, or else, as we all know, things will go sideways, and they still may. We start our stop. And so for many people, this, lighting a candle, this was a Jewish practice. So we just lighting a candle says something, right? And maybe you even, hey, we're going on family vacation, and we want this vacation to be more than kind of time of leisure and just enjoying and seeing. We want it to be a time of worship and rest, where God restores our soul. And so maybe as a family, we do something before we leave to say, God, we want this time to be consecrated and set apart for you as a gift that we might receive. And so it changes the way we do what we do. I throw on there a way of stopping. All of us, I think, have to consider the whole screen time thing. The first thing that I erased was like, get rid of your phone and flush it down the toilet. But I felt the Spirit of God kind of working back because I wouldn't do that either. But there's this tendency, I think, in our world that as long as we're hanging on to those things, it's so hard to stop. Next is we've got to rest. Abraham Herschel said some great things. He's a Jewish rabbi. One of the things he said was, if you're going to Sabbath, and I hope we do, if you work with your mind, Sabbath with your hands, and this isn't law, but if you work with your hands, Sabbath with your mind. Pick up a book if you work all day with your hands. But if you work all day behind a computer, get outside, build something, mow something, fix something. Figure out what gives you rest, what will restore you. This is, again, you're not made, the Sabbath is made for us, right? So it has to work. It's supposed to work for us. And God's given us the capacity to sort some of this out. Maybe we need to take a nap. Maybe we need to plan a time to be intimate with our spouses. Maybe we need to just mix it up. Maybe we need to work on something. Maybe we need to go out for a great meal. Maybe we need to just fast for a meal. But plan it, be prepared, talk about it, start it, stop it. And then lastly, some of you know this idea of pleasure stacking. Like the question with Sabbath is what fuels you, what lights you up, what causes you to be drawn upwards toward the goodness of God. Do that. Some of us, we love to just listen to worship music. Well, make sure that's a part of your Sabbath. Some of us, I just love to get together with so-and-so. They always kind of fire me up and just a fun time. Schedule that, plan that. Work it into your calendar. It's what your heart needs. So we consider what and how we eat. Maybe it's a time of exercise, getting outside, those kinds of things. And then lastly, it's always worship. And this isn't just worship by music. In fact, for me, and this is sort of a Romans 12 kind of thing, but for me, one of the best ways to Sabbath is to get on an airplane, go to the other side of the world where nobody knows me, and to get on the ground and just start serving people. When I come back from Uganda or Tanzania, or we're going to Mexico this summer, if you want to come with us, those for me it's like, oh, yeah. Oh, there's rest. Oh, God, you're so good. Oh, God, I can't, what? I get to be your child. God, this is so, and so it's it can be physically exhausting, it can work me, but it lights my soul up. It helps me worship Him in new kinds of ways. So how do we stop, rest, delight, and worship? I don't know, but I do know this. You are given a gift by your Creator, the one that made you, wired you, knows you, inside and out. And it was a limitation that He invites you to put on your life. It's called Sabbath. Go and practice it in different ways, that we would know Him, that we'd see Him, that when we get together, we'd worship Him as rested people full of joy and delight, just trying to fall more in love with a God that loves us more than we'll ever know.
Thanks so much for joining us, church. We hope that you enjoyed this message. To find more messages like this, or to see where you can get connected, or to give financially, please visit sierrabible.com.